As we looked at our text last week in Genesis 42, the brothers come back from Egypt after their first visit there, but they got to leave Simeon there. So they come back and they meet with Jacob. It's about 250 miles back to Hebron from Memphis, and they stop at a camping place. I know the text says an inn, but the Hebrew word there is a camping place. And one of the brothers opens up his sack of grain that they brought back, and he finds his money in the top of this sack of grain. And he's really startled by this, and they all look at this, but they don't all open their other sacks. They don't open them up at this point in time. And they all say, "What is this that God hath done to us?" So they're thinking that God is in control here, but you can see them gradually drawing closer to God through these events with Joseph. In the beginning, they weren't. They wanted to kill him, and they eventually sold him into slavery. So they're thinking, now that they're accused of being spies by this governor, this strange governor, second in command in Egypt, now, he said, if they find out this, then I'm going to be, or they're going to be viewed as thieves as well. You know, what's interesting is God is using Joseph to break their hard hearts. He's placing them in a situation where they are going to get softened hearts, but it's going to take a long time for these guys. Even at the end of the book of Genesis, we're going to see it hasn't fully taken place yet. The Egyptian governor has got Simeon, and he wants Benjamin too. And these guys are just beside themselves. But the Egyptian governor says, you bring Benjamin back, I'll release Simeon, and then you guys can just traffic about or just travel about in Egypt. You can have free reign here. That's all you got to do. That's all you got to do. So they go back to Jacob, and of course he says, no way. No way. I'm not giving up him. I lost my precious son Joseph. He's gone. And because he assumes that he was dead by an animal. And he says, and now you want to take Benjamin, and they even have Simeon? Oh, no, I can't do that. I can't do that. Jacob is being real emotional about this. Real emotional about this. And they're trying to explain to him, no, look, we're not getting any more food unless he gets Benjamin. And he says, well, why does he want Benjamin? I don't get it. Why did you even bother telling him what your family was? And they said, well, look, we didn't volunteer this stuff. He asked. He wanted to know, about my family. I don't know how he knew this stuff, but he wanted to know about our family. And so we told him. And Jacob says, you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have done that. And, Reuben stands up and he offers this largely emotional response. He says, well, if we go and take Benjamin back and we don't get him back, you can slay my 2 kids. Yeah, right. I'm going to kill your 2 kids. And what's the point of that, So then Jacob says, then will ye bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol. And he says, down to Sheol. Because remember in the Old Testament, multiple compartments of Sheol, a good spot and a bad spot. And he's saying, you're going to send me down to hell, basically. And he just says, no, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing this. So the famine gets worse. And it gets worse. They still have some small amount of fruit, but they don't have any grain, and the famine is growing. And you got to understand now that these guys are extremely wealthy. Extremely wealthy. So when the famine hits them, it's hitting the people that have the most finally. There's probably a lot of other people in Canaan that are just dying because they don't have food. These guys still have some, and they got a little bit of fruit and some spices and so on. So Jacob says to these kids, why don't you go back and just try and get a little bit more food? He's probably thinking that, well, if you just go back and ask for a little, maybe you're not going to have to go to the governor and get as much as we really would like. And maybe he's not going to want Benjamin, and, we can avoid that whole issue. And Judah says, wait a minute, Dad, you need to understand, this guy says no food unless Benjamin comes back. And Jacob is just outside of himself. He explodes and he says, wherefore dealt he so ill with me as to tell the man whether he had a brother? And then they say again, hey, look, we didn't mean to do it. He asked. He asked. Now, Simeon will get released if Benjamin comes, and they'll get food. It's the only way it's going to happen. And Judah makes this real clear to Jacob. Here's Jacob thinking, I know I don't want to give this up. I don't want to give Benjamin up. My beloved wife, Rachel's only living son. And he's my youngest. He's the most precious I got. I'm not going to do this. But he's forced into it. He's forced into it. If he wants to eat and feed his family and all the folks that he's got working for him, he's going to have to do this. He must also be thinking about the Abrahamic covenant that was passed down to him from Isaac that said, your people, the Jews, are going to be in a land that's not theirs for 400 years. And Jacob's probably thinking, I wonder if this is it. And they're going to suffer affliction. That's what the text says. And here he's probably thinking all these things that he is going on, but he's got to eat. He's got to eat. He's got to eat. So Judah keeps pleading with Jacob, and he says, Jacob, look, I'll offer myself as a personal guarantee. Well, this is a little bit better than what Reuben offered, but it's still kind of an empty promise. What does that mean? He'll offer himself as surety. But he just affirmed. He says, look, Benjamin's got to go. Dad, this is a genuine request. We didn't make this up. And I know Jacob is probably just thinking, and the rest of them, how why does he even want Benjamin? What's going on here? They just don't understand. And they're all thinking that they're all going to get imprisoned. And they may all die if they don't get any food. So they don't really have any choice. They've got to go back a second time. And Jacob, he just doesn't want to do this, but he finally gets persuaded by Judah, because Judah is really being empathetic with Jacob. Remember now, Judah lost two sons of his own. Two sons of his own. So he is empathizing with his dad, saying, look, I know what this is like. I don't want to lose him either. But this is what we're going to have to do if we want to eat. There's no way out of this. So Jacob finally acquiesces, and he says, look, gather the finest fruits that we have and take a little down to this Egyptian governor. He doesn't need any gold and silver. He's got lots of that. And they had it too, because again, they're just extremely wealthy people. These weren't just folks living in tents, that were eating grasshoppers or something. They were extremely wealthy, lots and lots of cattle, lots of people working for them. And he says, also take some balm, honey, spices, as well as myrrh, nuts, and almonds. And what he's saying is take a little bit of this, because I don't think they had much of it. I don't think they had much fruit either. They needed that grain, though, to sustain life, because if they didn't have that, they were all going to die. And Jacob knew this. He finally had to think through this in a practical way instead of an emotional way. He still didn't want to get rid of Benjamin, because he was fearful that they were going to keep Benjamin and put him into slavery or something. He just says, look, this is a practical offer, though. One, we give this to the governor. It's going to appease him and let him know that we're really serious about this. And two, these spices, which are grouped together are laudanum, they weren't available in Egypt. And if you remember back to the time when the Ishmaelites were on the way there from Canaan, that the brothers sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites, where they were going there to Egypt to trade these spices. So this would be another point of desirability for Joseph to get these commodities. So Jacob's thinking this might really help the situation, that Joseph's going to appreciate this, although they don't know it's Joseph. And he's the second most powerful person in the world at that time. Just a phenomenal rise from a slave to the second most powerful person in the world. And Jacob then says, look, take the money back also that they gave you. Because by now they've found that the money is in all of the sacks. They got all their money back. And this is really causing them to be upset, They just don't get it. They just don't get it. We buy this stuff. He gives us our money back. He wants our brother. He's keeping this brother. What is going on here? What is going on? And they're saying, well, maybe the Egyptians don't realize that they put the money back in the sack. Yeah, right. Who's going to believe that? How does that happen? Can you imagine going to the grocery store, giving them $200 for groceries, and you get home and your $200 is in your sacks? I don't think so. It's never happened to me. It's not likely to happen anytime soon either. But here's Jacob saying, well, look, you're just going to go back and you're going to give them this money back, and maybe they'll see you being real honest, and maybe they'll see these gifts as being very helpful and that we don't mean any harm. We're not thieves. And, they'll see Benjamin and everything will be fine. You get the food and you get out of there. So he says, go ahead, take Benjamin, take Benjamin. But as he does this, he invokes the supreme name of God that the Hebrews have for God being the most powerful, which is El Shaddai, the most powerful God, and that's the highest personal name of God in the Old Testament. So Simeon is captive. They want to bring him back. They want to bring Benjamin back, and they want to bring some food back, and they've got to start trusting God. Jacob is trusting God now, even more so than when he was before. So the brothers leave Canaan, and they got this double supply of money. One, to pay back what they had in the sacks, and two, to buy more. And they take Benjamin, and they're going to meet with Joseph. So for our message today, the text opens in Genesis 43, verses 16 to 25, seeing Joseph prepare for the meeting with these brothers. And when Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of his house, bring the men into the house and slay and make ready, for the men shall dine with me at noon. And the man did as Joseph bade, and the man brought the men to Joseph's house. And the men were afraid because they were brought into Joseph's house, and they said, because of the money that was returned in our sacks at the first time are we brought in, that he may seek occasion against us and fall upon us and take us for bondmen and our asses. And they came near to the steward of Joseph's house, and they spake unto him at the door of the house and said, O my Lord, we came indeed down at the first time to buy food. And it came to pass, when we came to the lodging place, that we opened our sacks, and behold, every man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight. And we have brought it again in our hand, and the money we have brought down in our hand to buy food, we know not who put our money in our sacks. And he said, peace be to you, fear not, your God and the God of your father hath given you treasure in your sacks. I had your money, and he brought Simeon out unto them. And the man brought the men into Joseph's house and gave them water, and they washed their feet, and he gave their asses provender, and they made ready the present against Joseph's coming at noon. And they heard that they should eat bread there. So without his brother's knowledge, he sees them coming, and he gives his steward, the guy that's running his household. Now you got to understand, this is like a palace here. The second guy in command. This will be similar to the White House. This is not just a little house with a couple of folks working there. There's probably lots and lots of people working there. And he takes the highest guy, the guy that's the administrator of the whole household, and he gives him instructions to bring them into the house. He said, I want them to come into my house, and I want you to prepare fresh meat and their main meal, which was at noon, to celebrate them coming back. So he leaves the house before his brothers come, so they can't see him, and greet him. So the servant greets him. This guy, the servant, does exactly what Joseph said. He's very loyal, he's dutiful. He's going to follow Joseph's instructions exactly. He brings the brothers in, and when these brothers come in, the first thing that they do, being sorely afraid, is they tell him about this money. Hey, we want you to know we got this money that we didn't take it. It was in our sacks, And this guy says to them, he says, yeah, I know that. I did it. I put it in there. Can you imagine what these guys are thinking now? You put this money back in my sack. They address him as Lord. these guys are being extremely, are just being extremely condescending, not condescending, I'm trying to think of a good word here, obeisance, bowing down to this guy. And they say, we came indeed down at the first time to buy food, and it came to pass, when we came to the lodging place, that we opened our sacks, and behold, every man's money was in the mouth of his sack, our money in full weight, and we have brought it again in our hand. And they said they brought additional money to buy grain this time. They were afraid of being called thieves in addition to being called spies. And they said, we really don't understand how this money got into the sack. And that's when he says, peace be to you, shalom lachem. And it's more than just a greeting, like shalom is how they greet each other, but shalom lachem meant a greeting with encouragement or an uplifting greeting. And he says that this is entirely the God of your father and your God's doing. And he tells him he did it. You know, what's interesting is that this guy does not realize that he's fulfilling part of the Abrahamic covenant, to be part of God's plan to move the Jews down to Egypt, where they would grow and develop over 400 years. So he brings Simeon out to join them, and being extremely hospitable, with acts that are primarily reserved for very honored guests, he brings water out to wash their feet, and he feeds their animals. And these guys get the gifts ready to give to Joseph. And they're being treated extremely well in this royal palace. So now the story shifts to Joseph coming into the scene to meet his brothers. And when Joseph came home, they brought him the present which was in their hand into the house, and bowed down themselves to him to the earth. And he asked them of their welfare and said, is your father well? The old man of whom he spake, is he yet alive? And they said, thy servant, our father, is well. He is yet alive. And they bowed the head and made obeisance. And he lifted up his eyes and saw Benjamin his brother, his mother's son, and said, is this your youngest brother of whom he spake unto me? And he said, God be gracious unto thee, my son. And Joseph made haste, for his heart yearned over his brother, and he sought where to weep, and he entered into his chamber and wept there. So Joseph timed this just perfectly. Right at the time of the meal, he comes in, and the brothers present him with his gifts, and they bow down to the ground as low as they possibly can, as low as they can. And Joseph has just got to be reliving these dreams that he had when he was just a little kid, well, just a young man, 17 years old, just before they sold him into slavery. He must have been just emotionally kindled beyond control. He was just hanging on there, seeing this. He hadn't seen Benjamin for over 20 years. That was the brother, the closest brother that he had. It came from the same mother. And he's still acting like he doesn't know these people. And so he says, how's your dad, basically? How's your dad? You know, the old man of whom he spake, is he yet alive? And they respond with more obeisance. They bow their heads to him in submission, saying that, yeah, he's alive, thy servant, our father. So they call Jacob his servant as well. Jacob then says, is this your youngest brother, whom you spake unto me? And he's still holding his emotions in check, but he can just feel his emotions starting to well up inside of him over this whole thing. How many years it's been since he's seen Benjamin. And Benjamin was just a little teeny guy, and now he's a grown-up young man in his early 20s. And he's still holding his emotions in check here. But you can just sense this exposition of his rank. He's trying to hang on to this, and he says, God be gracious unto thee, my son. So he's still trying to hold on to his emotions, and he's giving a little bit of his status here. And this was the first time he directly talked to Benjamin in way over 20 years. It could have been as much as 26 years. Because we don't know when in that 7-year famine period that these guys started coming down to Egypt. But seeing Benjamin grown up was more than he could handle. He just leaves the room and he goes and he cries as hard as he can. Get the emotion out. And then he returns. The text moves on to say, and he washed his face and came out, and he refrained himself and said, set on bread. And they set on for him by himself, and for them by themselves, and for the Egyptians that did eat with him by themselves, because the Egyptians might not eat bread with the Hebrews, for that it is an abomination unto the Egyptians. And they sat before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men marveled one with another, and they took and sent messes unto them from before him. But Benjamin's mess was 5 times so much as any of theirs, and they drank and were merry with him. So after he had cried really hard, he washes his face, he tries to get his composure back and to look relatively normal, and he directs his staff to start the meal. And they seat them in 3 different groups. They got the staff in one group, they got the brothers in one group, and then Joseph by himself. Now Joseph has to be by himself because he's the ruler. He had never capitulated to the paganism of the Egyptians. He wasn't going to eat with them. He could have, because they were trying to, remember back when Pharaoh was trying to integrate him into society by having him marry Asenath, one of the priest's daughters, and just plug him into the high society of the Egyptians. He didn't spiritually, so he still had some standoffish with them, and he wasn't going to eat with his brothers just yet. He was exalted over all of these people, and he just didn't fully integrate into the paganism of the Egyptians. The next thing he did, though, must have really caused his brothers a lot of anxiety, because he had the Egyptians seat his brothers in the order of their births, from the oldest to the youngest. Now, commentator Henry Morris says that you can take 11 people and arrange them in a multiplicity of ways. It's almost 40 million different ways. Now, even if they didn't understand those odds, they knew that this was really strange. Wait a minute, you're putting all of us in this birth order here? Come on. How is this going? The text says they marveled at this, and vehitmehu is the Hebrew word, and it means they were dumbfounded, they were stupefied, they were astonished, they were bewildered. It was, again, one more event that was just outside of any of their experiences, and they just didn't know how to act. Then Joseph conducts a test, another test, to see if these guys are still filled with the envy, jealousy that they had that caused him to get sold into slavery. He has the stewards give Benjamin 5 times the amount of food that the others got, just to see if they were going to be jealous of Benjamin. And they weren't. They didn't seem to mind. They were just drinking and making merry. So he's looking at this and thinking, well, there's no obvious jealousy there. And he's thinking, I'm almost satisfied that they have had a change of heart, but not quite. He's going to test them again. And he sets up this final test before he's going to reveal himself to them. The text moves on in Genesis 44. And he commanded the steward of the house, saying, fill the men's sacks with food as much as they can carry, and put every man's money in his sack's mouth. And put my cup, the silver cup, in the sack's mouth of the youngest, and his grain money. And he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. Now, you think about this now. They've given they've given the steward back the money from the first time, plus they had money from the second time to buy more food. He put both monies back in. the sacks. They got all this money back now, so they haven't paid anything for the grain. Plus, Joseph has this special silver cup, and they put that into Benjamin's sack. So again, without their knowledge, they're on the way back to Canaan, and they don't know that this money's there, and they don't know that the cup's there. Somehow, in some manner, Joseph used this cup in his sacred devotions. We don't know how he used it. The Egyptians didn't understand what Joseph was doing. They didn't understand his God, so they just talk about this as being some divining type thing. Maybe he predicts the future. This is how he gets his dreams or something like that. But it had significance. So it was an important thing for Joseph to put this into Benjamin's sack so he could then roll out the last component of his test for them. He's going to stage another crime here, and he allows them to leave. The steward does exactly what he's told to do. I don't think the steward knew what was going on. The text never tells us that the steward was aware of what Joseph's plan was, but the steward is in on this, at least to the extent of planting these things in the sacks, like he did the money the last time and now the money this time as well as the cup. So the text moves on. As soon as the morning was light, the men were sent away, they and their asses, and when they were gone out of the city, and were not yet far off, Joseph said unto his steward, Up, follow after the men, and when thou dost overtake them, say unto them, Wherefore have ye rewarded evil for good? Is not this that in which my Lord drinketh, and whereby he indeed divineth? Ye have done evil in doing so. And he overtook them, and he spake unto them these words. So the brothers are now just outside the city limits of Memphis. They don't know that they've got this stuff. Joseph just gives them enough lead time to let them get going and get far enough away where they're just thinking, hey, everything's great. We don't know why we've been these honored guests, and everything's fine. We're really not spies. We're really not thieves. This is really great, and everything's going to be okay. We got Simeon back, but Benjamin's there, and hey, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. So the steward overtakes them and makes this accusation. Why have you rewarded what we have done to you, for you, with evil? And they have no idea what he's talking about. But it's interesting that one says, he's accusing them of doing this. He's accusing them of taking the cup. He doesn't say much about the money, but he's accusing them of the cup. And the text move on, and they said unto him, Wherefore speaketh my Lord such words as these? Far be it from the servants that they should do such a thing. Behold, the money which we found in our sack's mouth, we brought again unto thee out of the land of Canaan. How then should we steal out of my Lord's house silver and gold? With whomsoever thy servants be found, let him die, and we also will be my Lord's bondmen. And he said, Now also let it be according unto your words. He with whom it is found shall be my bondman, and ye shall be blameless. Then they hasted and took down every man his sack to the ground, and opened every man his sack. And he searched and began at the eldest, and left off at the youngest. And the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Then they rent their clothes and laid at every man his ass and returned to the city. So the servant accuses them. They strongly deny this, and they say, wait a minute. And they had this, why would we even bother doing this? We wouldn't do this. It's a rhetorical question. Why would we do this? It just doesn't make any sense. We're the crown servants here. We're your guys' servants. We're trying to do what you want. And just to kind of affirm their honesty, they reiterate that they brought their money back. Look, we even brought our money back to you that we found in our sacks. We're not stealing anything. And then just to make this one better, whomsoever you find this in, we're going to kill him, and the rest of us will all be slaves to you. And whoops, That's not what they should have said, but that's what they did say. So the servant agrees, and he restates their offer just to make sure it's clear. Okay, this is what you're going to do, right? Whomever I find whoever I find holding this cup, he'll be executed, and the rest of you are going to be slaves. So the steward begins again by searching from the oldest to the youngest, just like he did when he seated them, the oldest to the youngest. This has got to shake them up too, that there's a recognition of their birth order. He searches Reuben first, and he works all the way down to Benjamin, and of course he finds the cup in Benjamin's sack where it's been planted. And these guys are so distraught at this. They don't understand it. They're sure Benjamin didn't steal this thing. So they're tearing their clothes. They're just really upset about this. And they pack their animals and they go back to Memphis. They got to deal with this now. Now the text moves on. And Judah and his brethren came to Joseph's house, and he was yet there, and they fell before him on the ground. And Joseph said unto them, What deed is this that ye have done? Know ye not that such a man as I can indeed divine? And Judah said, What shall we say unto my Lord? What shall we speak? Or how shall we clear ourselves? God hath found out the iniquity of thy servants. Behold, we are my Lord's bondmen, both we and he also in whose hand the cup is found. And he said, Far be it from me that I should do so. The man in whose hand the cup is found, he shall be my bondman. But as for you, get you up in peace unto your father. He's sending them back. They came directly to Joseph, and this time they completely prostrated themselves in front of him. Not just bowing down to the ground, they just laid right down on the ground. Now they're really begging. Now they're really, really begging. They're groveling as much as they ever have before. And Joseph begins by saying, What have you done here? What have you done? Don't you know that I can divine these things? I know these types of things, and that's really got to shake them up. I've got this power, and I know that you stole my cup. And he was really putting them to the test. Though Judah becomes the family statesman here and says, look, we're just completely bewildered. We don't even know what to do. But he says something that's really telling here, that Elohim has found out, and we are all going to be slaves. And he's referring to the time that they sold Joseph, and were trying to kill him. He's not saying that Elohim is angry at us or found us out for trying to steal the cup, because they didn't steal the cup. So he's referring back. He's finally making the total admission that they were wrong. They should have never done this. Never done this. So Joseph still playing this thing because the test is not completely over, says, look, I'm not going to execute him. I'm not going to make the rest of you slaves. I'm going to keep him, though. The rest of you go back to your father in peace. And I know what they're thinking. In peace? Are you kidding me? There's not going to be any peace when I get in front of Joseph. Peace? Because that's exactly, or in front of Jacob, that's exactly what Jacob didn't want. Jacob knew this was going to happen. So they're now all going back. They got Simeon with them, but they don't have Benjamin. And they're going back. Unbelievable story. Just unbelievable. Can you imagine these family dynamics? I don't care what kind of problems you got in your family. You don't have these. You can come up with the worst problem you've had with kids, parents, siblings, in-laws. None of them even come close to this. And the thing that gets pushed through this whole thing is that God is moving here to cause repentance, to cause forgiveness, to have his Abrahamic covenant just move forward. That is what's so hard for us to see living here on this planet, that God's will gets done. Always. No matter how much sin, envy, jealousy, theft, whatever sin you want to add, God's will gets done. Everything the scripture says is going to happen. and it always will. Amen. Let's pray.